He said that she had become invisible. He said it in front of everyone and smiled. What Rachel Bennett still did not know was that that smile would cost him everything. The voice of Robert Cavendish cut through the banquet hall like a knife cuts through silk. Clean, precise, without hesitation. You no longer belong in this place, Rachel. And everyone here already knows it except you. 200 people. 200 people who knew her name, who sat at a table, who had hugged her on birthdays, at graduations, on rainy nights when the world became too narrow. 200 people who at that moment looked at the floor, at their glasses, at anywhere except her face. Rachel did not move. She was 32 years old, had an 8-year relationship with that man and had learned early that dignity does not shout. Dignity stands firm when everyone tries to knock it down. That is why she remained motionless in the center of the hall of the Cavendish mansion, in the dress he himself had chosen for that night, and let each word fall on her like dust on marble without penetrating inside. "Robert," she said in a low voice only so that he could hear her. "Are you sure of what you are doing?" He was sure, and what was worse, he was proud of it. Robert Cavendish was 41 years old and had built an empire in the logistics and transportation sector. Cavendish Logistics occupied 3 floors of one of the most expensive buildings in the financial center of the city. His name appeared on lists, in magazines, in people's conversations. They had never known him in person. He was one of those men who enter a restaurant and even before sitting down already know which table they are going to be given, who call and expect the phone to be picked up before the second ring, who confuse respect with fear and believe it is the same thing. For 8 years Rachel Bennett had been the woman by the side of that man. Not his shadow but his equal. She had kept the company afloat in the first years when things were bleeding and partners were fleeing. She organized the administrative department, resolved conflicts with suppliers, spent sleepless nights in front of spreadsheets while he slept peacefully because he knew she would take care of everything. She had training in financial management, a sharp mind and a rare ability to turn chaos into order without ever raising her voice. What she did not have according to Robert was shine. "You are competent, Rachel. You always have been, but competence is not the same as presence. And I need someone who makes people turn around when she enters the room." He had said it 3 weeks earlier in a conversation that she considered only a temporary crisis. But Robert had not said those words into the void. He had said them with Sophia Fontaine by his side. Sophia was 26 years old and worked as a public relations specialist at Cavendish Logistics. At least that is what her contract said. She had been there for 6 months. She was extroverted, calculating in that way that seemed spontaneity, and had seen in Robert exactly what he needed to see in himself. Greatness. She treated him as if every decision of his was historic and every word profound. Robert, who had spent years next to a woman who loved him enough to contradict him when he was wrong, discovered that he preferred the comfort of someone who never questioned him. That night of the party for his father's 50th birthday, the patriarch Samuel Cavendish, Sophia had arrived before Rachel. Not by chance. When Rachel crossed the door of the mansion, Sophia was already in the center of the hall smiling at the same guests who had known Rachel for years. Robert was by her side, presenting her not as an employee but as a companion. Rachel stopped at the entrance, understood everything in less than 5 seconds but did not retreat. She crossed the hall with her back straight, kissed Samuel Cavendish with a sincere kiss because she really respected that man and held Robert's gaze without a single question in her eyes, only clarity. It was Robert who could not stand her silence. "I should have told you earlier," he continued with his voice loud enough for the nearest guests to hear clearly, "but I thought you would understand it on your own. Apparently you did not." Mrs. Claire Cavendish, Robert's mother, closed her eyes for a second. Samuel left his glass on a waiter's tray and remained motionless. Phoebe, Rachel's sister-in-law and personally invited by Samuel because the old man had always considered her part of the family, took a step toward her sister. Rachel, without turning her head, raised 2 fingers almost imperceptibly. "Stay there. You do not need to explain anything to me, Robert," said Rachel. "I already understood." She understood that everything had ended. That indefinite gesture that encompassed the hall, the people, the party itself was no longer her place. An old woman sitting by the window sighed audibly. A man in a grey suit nudged his neighbor. And Sophia 2 meters from them looked at her own hands with an expression that pretended to be discomfort, but was in reality poorly disguised satisfaction. And then Rachel did what no one expected. She smiled. It was not a nervous smile or one of shame. It was the smile of someone who has just received important information and already knows exactly what to do with it. "All right," she said. "But before I go, I want you to look at me properly because you are not going to see me like this again for a long time." Robert frowned. In her voice there was something that was not anger or pain, something he could not identify, and that strangely resembled certainty. She took her bag, said goodbye to Samuel Cavendish once more with a long hug. The old man squeezed her shoulders with both hands, and when he let go there was something like an apology in his eyes. And she left without looking back. The air on the street was fresh for a Thursday night. The taxi she had called arrived in 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes she remained on the sidewalk in front of the mansion listening to the muffled sounds of the party inside. Only there, without witnesses, without an audience, did her hands tremble. It was not weakness. It was the tremble of someone who still did not know what shape everything would take the next day. The next morning she went to the office of Cavendish Logistics only for the last time, not to beg, not to make a scene, but to collect her personal belongings from the office she had occupied for 3 years as administrative director, a position Robert had created for her but whose responsibilities she herself had built brick by brick. The secretary Fiona could barely look her in the eyes when she entered. "Dr. Rachel Bennett," she began. "Good morning, Fiona. Can you call the Human Resources Department? I only need 20 minutes. The head of Human Resources, Stephen, placed an already prepared envelope on the table. She opened it, read every line, asked for a pen, signed where she had to sign, and returned it. She went to the office, packed into a box 3 small plants, a frame with a photo of her and Phoebe on a trip to the south, 2 management books with annotations in the margins, and an old keychain that had belonged to her mother. She took nothing the company could claim. She left nothing she could regret later. When she left, Sophia Fontaine was in the hallway. It was obvious she had done it on purpose. "Rachel," she said in a tone that tried to sound soft but carried a knife underneath. "I hope you understand that none of this was personal." Rachel looked at her for 2 seconds and kept walking, not because she had nothing to answer, but because some people do not deserve the effort of a response. The apartment she had bought with her own salary, not the one she shared with Robert, but a smaller one that had always been in her name and that Robert called that unnecessary shack, was 20 minutes from the office. She arrived, left the box on the kitchen table, sat in a chair facing the window, and then noticed it. In the last few days there had been something different in her body, a tiredness that did not go away with sleep, morning dizziness she had attributed to stress, a sensation she had pushed to the back of her consciousness because there were more urgent things. She remained motionless in the chair for a long moment. Then she got up, went to the pharmacy on the corner, and returned with a small bag. The next 10 minutes would change everything, not only her story but also Robert's. Only he still did not know it. The result appeared sooner than she expected. Rachel looked at the 2 lines for so long that the light in the bathroom seemed to change tone. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt, no possibility of folding that moment in half and putting it in a drawer to think about later. She was pregnant by the man who less than 24 hours earlier had pointed her out in front of 200 people and told her she no longer belonged in his world. She left the test on the edge of the sink, opened the faucet, and washed her hands slowly as if that ritual could order her thoughts. The water was cold. She did not adjust the temperature. When she looked in the mirror, the woman who looked back at her did not seem broken. She seemed strangely calm. That calm that comes after the ground has gone from under your feet and the body has not yet registered the fall. She left the bathroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and kept silence long enough that it could not be measured. Then she took the phone, opened Robert's contact, held her finger 3 seconds over his name, and closed the app. Inside her there was a very clear logic, a logic that did not come from resentment or wounded dignity. It came from something older, more solid, from the same part that had organized the company when the partners fled, that had remained standing in the center of that hall without needing anyone to hold her up. Robert had made a public, deliberate, and humiliating choice. He had chosen the stage, he had chosen the spectators, he had chosen every word with the precision of someone rehearsing news. The child was not an instrument of revenge. It was not a way to get him back. It was not a card to play. It was not anything that belonged to him before belonging to her. That child was above all hers. She had to understand what she, Rachel Bennett, wanted for her own life. Not what he deserved, not what the aunts would expect in family chats. She dedicated the whole night to that question until an answer began to take shape. The next morning she called Phoebe, her sister-in-law, technically already ex, though that title still heard on both sides. Phoebe answered on the second ring. Phoebe Cavendish was 36 years old, a physiotherapist, mother of 2 small children and the only person at the party the night before who had taken a step toward Rachel before those 2 raised fingers stopped her. "I know you are going to say I should have called earlier," Rachel began. "I am not going to say anything," Phoebe answered. The silence lasted 2 seconds. "I am pregnant." On the other end, there were no words, only a long sigh of those that carry a weight the voice cannot yet express. "When did you find out?" "Last night when I got home." "And he knows?" "Not yet." Another pause. Phoebe knew her sister-in-law well enough to understand that the next question was the most important. "Are you going to tell him?" "I do not know yet," Rachel answered, and it was the most honest truth she had spoken in the last few days. Phoebe arrived at the apartment 40 minutes later with fresh bread, cheese, and an expression that balanced care and restraint. She asked no unnecessary questions. She offered no opinions until they were asked. She made coffee, put 2 cups on the table, and sat across from Rachel like someone preparing to listen to a long story. Rachel told her everything. Not only the party, not only the test. She told her about the 3 weeks before, the signs she had seen and preferred not to name, the conversations that had changed tone, the nights when Robert came home late with a lightness in his shoulders that had nothing to do with work. She told her about the scene with Sophia in the office hallway that morning, the 2 words she had spoken, nothing personal, and what it had cost her not to stop and answer. Phoebe listened to the end. When Rachel finished, she looked at the cup for a moment. "The apartment is in your name. You have time," she said at last. It was not a question. "Yes." "The severance will last how many months?" Rachel calculated mentally. 6 months comfortably, 8. "If I cut expenses." "Then you have time to decide with a cool head." "Phoebe," Rachel said in a low voice, "I did not come here for a financial plan." "I know," she raised her gaze. "I came because you are the strongest person I know, and this morning your voice on the phone did not sound like that. So first we make sure you have firm ground under your feet, and then we cry everything that needs to be cried." The word cry was what broke something. Rachel had not cried at the party. She had not cried at the office. She had not cried looking at the test, washing her hands, or sitting on the edge of the bed in the silence of the night. She cried now at the kitchen table with the coffee cup in front of her, while her sister sat across without saying anything, without moving, just being present. And that was exactly what she needed. 3 days later, the first complication she had not foreseen arrived. The phone rang. She recognized the number immediately. Samuel Cavendish, Robert's father, answered the old man. He went straight with that economy of words that had always characterized him. He had found out from his wife Mrs. Claire that Rachel had collected her things from the office. He wanted to know if she was all right. He wanted to talk if she accepted. Rachel accepted. They met in a cafe called Ground in the neighborhood where Samuel lived. It was Wednesday afternoon. The old man arrived before her as always. In 8 years Rachel had never seen Samuel Cavendish arrive late. He was 68 years old, his hair completely white, and on his face the unchanging expression of someone who has seen too much to be surprised easily. When she sat down, he looked at her for an instant before speaking. "I want you to know that what happened that night does not have my approval. It never did. Mr. Samuel, you do not need to defend me. I know how your son is, and I know what I was for him and for the company that without me would have sunk in 2019. And he knows it, even if he never acknowledges it." She kept silence. "You will be all right," he said, not as consolation but as an objective evaluation of someone who understands people. And then she understood that she could not hide the pregnancy from him. Not because he would never ask that question, but because in his eyes there was a question that had nothing to do with work or the apartment or the professional future. It had to do with her herself, with how she really felt. Rachel opened her mouth to say "I am fine," and instead what came out was "I am pregnant." The silence that followed was not of shock. It was the silence of someone who closes his eyes for 2 seconds, breathes deeply, and when he opens them carries a new weight he is not going to transfer to her. "Does Robert know?" he asked, lowering his voice an octave. "No." Samuel looked at the table. When he raised his face there was something different. No longer only sadness. It was the expression of someone who has just seen the consequences of a chain of events that is still unfolding. Rachel said slowly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the end before reacting." She nodded. Robert and Sophia did not meet 6 months ago. They met 14 months ago. The air in the cafe did not change. People kept talking, drinking coffee, looking at their phones. The world did not stop, but inside Rachel something that was still trying to build the chronology of the last months collapsed all at once. 14 months while she organized the financial department of his company, while she did not sleep in front of spreadsheets while they celebrated their last anniversary in a restaurant where he arrived 40 minutes late and left before dessert because he had an urgent call. 14 months of lies built inside the same company she had helped save. I know that from a practical point of view this changes nothing, he continued. But you deserve to know the whole truth. Rachel put her hands on the table, motionless, frozen. Thank you, she said, and it was the heaviest word she had spoken in her entire life. On the way back to the apartment on the bus that crossed the city at the end of the day, she put her hand on her own belly, an involuntary unconscious gesture that arose before she decided to do it. 14 months. The child growing inside her had been conceived in a relationship that was already a lie before it ended. Robert, who knew nothing of the pregnancy, continued living with Sophia as if the previous chapter was already closed and filed. What he did not know was that that chapter was still being written and that the author was her. Rachel had learned as a child that some losses do not come with noise or slammed doors or loud voices in the hallway or that kind of scene that prepares the body for the blow. They come in silence in the form of an administrative notification, a polite phone call, an official letter envelope that someone leaves on the table with the expression of someone fulfilling a protocol. That is how the second loss arrived 3 weeks after the party. 3 weeks in which she had put the apartment in order, updated her resume, spoken with 2 employment agencies, and had fallen asleep most nights with the palm of her hand stuck to her belly without realizing she was doing it. The phone rang at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. Unknown number. She answered because she had sent her resume to 6 companies and any of them could call. It was none of them. Rachel Bennett. The voice was feminine, professional, trained to sound neutral in any circumstance. I am Dr. Laura Hayes from the Unified Clinic. You are covered by our corporate insurance from Cavendish Logistics. Correct. Rachel closed the laptop. I was, she answered. I was fired 3 weeks ago. Small pause. That pause that arises when the person on the other end has to readjust what she was going to say. I understand. In that case, I must inform you that the policy was cancelled as of the dismissal date. There is a scheduled appointment in your name for next week for pregnancy follow-up according to your request from last week. Unfortunately, without a valid policy, we cannot carry it out with the insurance. Would you like to reschedule it as private payment? Rachel heard the amount, thanked her, and hung up. For an instant she looked at the wall. Medical insurance seemed the only item she had not taken into account in her calculations of 6 or 8 months of reserves. Not out of carelessness, but because for 8 years at Robert's side that policy had been as constant as electricity. One of those things that exist without making you think about them until the day they stop existing. She opened the spreadsheet she had made a few days earlier, added a line, recalculated. With the expenses of private pregnancy follow-up, the reserves reached 5 months. Not 6, not 8. 5. The child was due in 6 months. She did not collapse. It was not her style. Instead, she called Phoebe. I need a recommendation for a private obstetrician gynecologist who does not charge for the consultation as if it were an apartment, she said without preamble. Phoebe, who knew her sister well enough to recognize what was behind that objectivity, asked the insurance stopped working the day of the dismissal. Pause. I have a colleague who sees patients at the Central Medical Center. She is good, honest on price, and does not treat patients who pay out of pocket as second-class citizens. I will send you the contact now. The contact arrived less than 2 minutes later. Dr. Caroline Hayes saw patients on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Rachel booked for the following week, adjusted the spreadsheet again, and spent the rest of the morning editing her resume with the concentration of someone who knows time is limited. In the afternoon, a response arrived from one of the employment agencies. The consultant, a woman named Victoria, was direct. There was a vacancy for financial director in a medium-sized company in the distribution sector. The salary was lower than the previous one, but Rachel's profile was strong. They wanted to schedule an interview. Rachel said yes before the sentence ended. The interview took place 2 days later in a meeting room on the 12th floor of an office building in the center. The company was called Nova Distributors. The director who interviewed her was around 55 years old, had graying hair and the posture of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly. He read her resume in silence for 2 full minutes, then left the sheet on the table and looked at her. You organized the entire administrative department of Cavendish Logistics alone in less than 2 years. In 18 months, she specified. And why did you leave? There were several ways to answer that question. She had rehearsed 3 on the way. She chose the simplest and most true. The company took a direction different from the one I was willing to follow. The director nodded slowly. He asked no more personal questions. He asked her 4 technical questions, all substantial. She answered without hesitation. At the end, he said he would give an answer in 5 business days. Rachel left the building with the feeling that everything had gone well. Not euphoria, only a cool and precise evaluation of someone who knows her own value. Precisely in the elevator going down, a dizziness came over her. It was not strong. One of those that appear suddenly, last 30 seconds and disappear. But during those 30 seconds the world lost 1,000th of sharpness, and the body remembered without asking permission that she was no longer alone. She leaned against the wall of the elevator and breathed. When the doors opened on the ground floor, it had already passed, but she did not forget it. The consultation with Dr. Caroline Hayes was on Tuesday morning in a small well-lit office on the 2nd floor of the medical center. The doctor was around 45 years old, had a calm voice and sure hands. The kind of professional who radiates competence without needing to prove it. The ultrasound confirmed 16 weeks. Everything within normal. Heartbeat rhythmic. Rachel heard that sound for the first time. It was impossible to prepare for that moment. She had read about it. She had heard other women describe its sisters, friends, co-workers for years. The descriptions never reached what happens when the sound fills the office and the whole body and reason understand without appeal that it is real. She did not cry there. She remained motionless, looking at the screen with an expression that Dr. Caroline Hayes recognized instantly. She had seen it hundreds of times. It was the face of a woman living that moment in solitude. The doctor made no unnecessary comments. She printed the images, gave her the report, explained the next steps with clarity and concreteness. Only when Rachel stood up to leave did she say in a low voice, "If you need anything outside office hours, you can write to me." I usually answer. Rachel looked at her for a second. "Thank you," she said. And this time the word did not weigh. It warmed. Precisely when leaving the medical center with the envelope of results under her arm, she saw him. She had not planned it. It was impossible to plan it. Robert was on the other side of the street on the opposite sidewalk in front of the terrace of a cafe talking on the phone. Dark suit, the same posture, that mixture of authority and impatience he carried in his body like someone carrying a title. He did not see her. Rachel remained motionless exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which the envelope with the results weighed more than it should, in which the sound of the heartbeat still echoed inside her, in which the calculations of the spreadsheet 5 months of reserves child in 6 crossed her consciousness like lightning. Then she kept walking, not because she was afraid, not because she did not know what to say, but because that was not the moment. The right moment is not the one that arises casually on a sidewalk. It is the one you choose with a clear head and firm ground under your feet. She turned the corner and continued forward. The response to the interview arrived the next day. Victoria from the agency called at 9 in the morning with a voice that tried to balance professionalism and delicacy. That balance only exists when the news is not good. Nova Distributors chose another profile. The director said, "Your trajectory is exceptional." She added quickly, "But they decided on a candidate with specific experience in their sector." Rachel thanked her and hung up. For an instant she remained with the phone in her hand. 5 months of reserves. Child in 6. A lost vacancy. The observation period that was starting to eat the savings calculated with so much care. And then the phone vibrated again. Message from Phoebe. "I managed to speak with Samuel. He says he has something important to tell you and he does not want to do it by phone. Do you accept meeting with him?" Rachel looked at the message for a long time. Samuel Cavendish had only once in his life said he had something important. Then the important thing was that the company was about to lose its largest contract in its history, and he had warned her so she could act before it was too late. The old man did not use that expression in vain. She replied when it suits him. She left the phone on the table, opened the spreadsheet again, looked at the figures. There was one thing Rachel Bennett had learned in the years she had held the company with her own hands while the others laughed. The most dangerous moment is not when everything collapses at once, but when the losses arrive small with polite intervals. Each one by itself seems reasonable. Each one is only a necessary adjustment until you look at the sum and understand that the ground has gone from under your feet and no one warned you. She closed the laptop and for the first time since the night of the party felt the real weight of what she was carrying. Not only the child, not only the accounts, Not only the lost vacancy or the cancelled insurance or the 5 months that should have been 8. The weight of doing all that while on the other side no one knew what was happening. The question she had pushed to the back of her consciousness since the night of the pharmacy returned this time without asking permission. Until when? Samuel Cavendish this time chose another place. Not the cafe of the previous meeting, a neutral passing place where two people can talk without attracting attention. This time he indicated his own house through a message transmitted by Phoebe with the specific instruction to enter through the side door, not the main one. Rachel noticed the detail. She understood what it meant. Robert must not know about that meeting. Samuel's house was in a quiet residential neighborhood far from the mansion where the party had been held. It was smaller than one would expect from someone of the Cavendish family. 2 floors, modest garden, iron fence without ostentation. That kind of house that says more about the character of the one who chose it than about the bank balance. Mrs. Claire opened the side door with an expression Rachel had never seen on her. It was not the trained courtesy of social events nor the discomfort of the party. It was something deeper, older. The face of a woman carrying a weight she did not choose and no longer knows where to leave it. Mrs. Claire, Rachel said, and in that single word entire apologies fit. Rachel, Mrs. Claire answered with the same economy. They entered through the kitchen. To the left, Samuel was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that seemed to have been untouched for a long time. When she entered, he stood up. It was a gesture he always made regardless of who entered because he was one of those men who stand up when someone enters the room. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said it was important." "It is important." He pointed to the chair in front of him. "Sit down." Mrs. Claire remained standing by the sink with her back turned, playing with something that did not need it. Samuel put both hands on the table and looked at Rachel with the frankness of someone who has practiced honesty for decades and no longer knows how to do it any other way. "Robert is going to announce his engagement to Sophia at the end of the month," he said. "Closed event without press coverage. It is already confirmed." The air in the kitchen did not change temperature. Rachel did not take her eyes off the old man's face. "That is not what I had to tell you," Samuel continued. "The engagement is a consequence of the rest. This is what I had to tell you. Sophia is pregnant." Mrs. Claire stopped moving by the sink. Rachel did not move. "We found out 2 weeks ago." Continue slowly like someone who knows that every word falls differently. "Robert told me yesterday. He is euphoric. He talks about heirs, about succession, about everything he always wanted." Pause. "He does not know that you are also pregnant." "I did not tell him. It was not my place. But now the situation has changed." "Why has it changed?" she asked. Her voice was firm. Only she knew what it cost her. Samuel leaned slightly forward. "Yesterday, the same day Robert told me about Sophia, the family lawyer came to see me. Robert is initiating a review of the contracts from the period when you were administrative director. He claims there were irregularities in the transfers of 2019. Rachel did not fall. She is not trying to build a version according to which you caused damage to the company. The silence that followed was different from all the pauses of that week. Mrs. Claire turned for the first time and looked directly at Rachel. "I know what you did for this company," said the old man. And in his voice there was a contained anger Rachel had never heard before. "I was there in 2019. I saw it, and I am not going to pretend I did not see it." Rachel left the Cavendish house 40 minutes later with 3 facts that did not exist when she entered. Sophia was pregnant. The engagement would be announced at the end of the month. Robert was gathering documentation to accuse her of losses she had actually prevented. She sat in the car she had called before leaving. She was not in a condition to wait on the street and remained motionless in the backseat while the driver asked for the address. She gave the address of the apartment and during the whole journey looked out the window without seeing anything that passed outside. The geometry of what she had just learned was cruel in its precision. Robert was not only moving forward. He was actively building a version of the facts in which she ended up guilty. If that version acquired legal weight and it did not matter that it was a lie, the process would cost time, money, and energy. And she had 5 months of reserves, a child on the way, no medical insurance. And there was another part, the one she still could not look at directly. Sophia was pregnant. Robert was going to be a father twice, 2 children from 2 different women, and he only knew about one. The choice she had in front of her had never been simple. Now it had stopped being only personal. It had become strategic, legal, financial, and irreversible. If she told about the pregnancy, now Robert would know. For any process, she would lose the only element that was still under her control. He would appear with lawyers, with money, with a version already built that she was a problematic former employee. Her son would become currency in a dispute she did not have the resources to fight on equal terms. If she did not tell, the time would continue advancing, the belly would grow, and at some point the choice would be made by the body itself. There was no path without loss. Phoebe appeared at the apartment that same night without invitation. She had the capacity forged over decades of living next to her sister to feel when she had to appear without warning and when she had to warn. That night, appearing without warning was the right decision. She entered, saw Rachel's face, left her bag on a chair and sat at the kitchen table. Rachel told her everything this time without the clinical objectivity of previous conversations, with the broken edges of someone holding more than her hands can bear. Phoebe listened to the end. When Rachel finished, she looked at the table for a moment. "You need a lawyer," she said. "Before any other decision, before telling, before not telling, before any step, you need to know where you stand." "I know where I stand," Rachel answered. "I stand on a field he prepared long before I knew I was going to step on it." "Exactly," said Phoebe, looking at her. "That is why you need someone who knows that field better than he does." Phoebe had a colleague, not a lawyer, but married to a lawyer who years earlier had gone through a completely different problem. She gave a name. The name was Dr. Frederick Lewis, specialist in labor and family law. Phoebe had the contact saved. Rachel said she would think about it. "You do not have time to think," Phoebe answered without hardness but without retreat. "You have time to act." The consultation with Dr. Frederick Lewis took place 2 days later in a discreet office in the Garden District. The lawyer was around 40 years old, had precise speech and the habit of noting everything by hand in a black cover notebook. A detail Rachel noticed, and that for some reason inspired more confidence than any diploma on the wall. Rachel set out the years in the company, the functions performed, the dismissal, the severance, the information from Samuel Cavendish about the contract review. Dr. Frederick Lewis listened, noted, asked surgically precise questions. At the end, he closed the notebook and said, "The good news is that you signed a termination agreement. There is no admission of guilt." What he is trying to build now refers to the period after your dismissal and will require proof of intent to cause damage, which is extremely difficult when the person he accuses was documentarily responsible for the financial cleanup of that period. Pause. The bad news is that processes like this do not need foundation to do harm. They only need time and money. How much time do I have before he formalizes something? If he is in the contract review phase, probably between 30 and 60 days until any official notification. The lawyer looked at her attentively. "Is there anything else I need to know before defining strategy? You mentioned a personal situation that could have legal relevance in this context." Rachel kept silence for a second, then put the envelope with the ultrasound results on the table. Dr. Frederick Lewis opened it, read the report, looked at the date. 16 weeks at the time of the exam. "That means now she has 18 weeks, he said out loud. He raised his eyes. "The father is the same man who is trying to open a case against you." The lawyer kept silence for an instant. Not surprised, but the look of someone quickly rearranging a board that has just become significantly more complex. "This changes the entire strategy," he said. "He cannot carry forward a case against you without the paternity of this child remaining in the same legal context. He is trying to cause you financial damage, and at the same time he denies the existence of this child. He is building an argument that will turn against him with proportional force. So I need to tell him now?" "No." The answer was immediate. "Now you document everything. Every consultation, every ultrasound, every expense. You are building the story before any revelation. When he finds out, you will already have a complete file. And Rachel, when he finds out, everything he is trying to build against you will seem much smaller than what he himself will have to answer for." Rachel left the office with the ultrasound envelope under her arm again and a list of documents she had to gather. The weight on her shoulders had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the heaviness of someone living on the defensive, but the heaviness of someone carrying something that has direction. Between the two things there was a difference, and she knew that difference well. That night, lying in the apartment while the city murmured on the other side of the window, Rachel remained for a long time with her eyes open in the darkness. She thought about Sophia pregnant, smiling in front of the cameras in the engagement announcement that had not yet taken place. She thought about Robert. Euphoric according to Samuel, talking about heirs as if the world had exactly the shape he had drawn. She thought about the child growing inside her of 18 weeks rhythmic heartbeat development within normal, not knowing anything about all that, not knowing that there was a board, that the pieces were moving, that the man who was his father at that same moment slept peacefully because he still did not know that everything was about to change shape. She put her hand on her belly and made the only decision that mattered that night. She was not going to react. She was going to prepare herself. Between the two things there was also a difference. And Robert Cavendish was about to discover which one it was. The notification arrived on Monday morning in an envelope with the logo of the Braga and Partners law firm corporate legal practice. Rachel was drinking coffee when the messenger knocked on the door. She signed the receipt without knowing what it was, opened it standing in the hallway, cup still in her hand, read it twice, then left the cup on the console with excessive delicacy, that delicacy the body adopts when the mind is too busy to coordinate simple movements. The notification formalized what Samuel had warned. Robert Cavendish, through his legal representatives, communicated his intention to investigate administrative irregularities relating to the period when Rachel Bennett held the position of director at Cavendish Logistics. He requested access to the internal correspondence documents and financial records that had been under her responsibility in that period. The deadline for the initial response was 15 days. 15 days. 20 weeks of pregnancy without medical insurance, with 5 months of reserves that had already become 4. She sent a photo of the notification to Dr. Frederick Lewis, without finishing reading the document for the second time. The lawyer replied in less than 10 minutes. I expected it. Do not respond to anything yourself. Come this afternoon if you can. The meeting in the Garden District office lasted almost 2 hours. Dr. Frederick was direct from the beginning. The notification was aggressive in form but weak in content. It did not indicate specific irregularities, did not mention damage amounts, did not attach documentary basis. It was an instrument of pressure, that kind of move that does not need foundation to work, because the objective is not to win the case but to force the other party to spend energy, money, and emotional balance until they give in or make a mistake. He is betting that you will not have the strength to resist, said the lawyer. And being honest, he has reasons for that bet. You are in a tight financial situation, you are pregnant, you are unemployed. From his point of view, the conditions are favorable. And from the point of view of reality? Rachel asked. From the point of view of reality, he does not have what is needed to sustain this. The 2019 documents show cleanup. There are no losses. But I will need the complete file you gathered, all the correspondence that demonstrates your decisions and his approval in that period, and at least one witness with direct knowledge of that period. Rachel immediately thought of Samuel. Dr. Frederick read her thought. No, not his father, he said. Someone without family ties. Someone who was there and has no personal reasons to take sides for anyone. Rachel fell silent. There was only one person, only one, a former colleague who had left Cavendish Logistics in 2019, precisely in the most critical period. A man named Marcus, who had left the company not because of disagreements with Rachel but because he had received an offer in another state and had accepted it. They had parted on good terms. In the following years they had exchanged messages from time to time. He knew what had happened in 2019 because he had been there when it happened. The problem was that contacting Marcus meant revealing the situation to someone outside the closed circle she had built. And every person who found out was a variable she did not control. Do you have someone in mind? Dr. Frederick asked. Possibly, she answered. I need to think about it calmly. There was no time to think calmly. 2 days later Phoebe called at 7 in the morning. Between the two sisters that hour was universal code for something happened and it cannot wait. Have you seen the announcement? Phoebe asked. She had seen nothing. She had slept badly, woken early, was sitting on the edge of the bed with the feeling of weight on her shoulders that had become her constant companion. What announcement? The engagement. Robert and Sophia announced it last night. There are photos, there is a note in the economy column, there are posts on their social networks. With mention of the pregnancy. Rachel froze. He announced it along with the engagement. Phoebe's voice had the caution of someone delivering something she knows will hurt. He called it the greatest joy of my life. Comments from partners, clients, family friends. Samuel did not put like or comment anything. I noticed because I checked expressly. Rachel hung up without rudeness. Phoebe understood. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in a time that no longer measured. It was not jealousy. It was something more complex than jealousy. It was the cruel geometry of seeing how the man who had publicly humiliated her publicly glorified himself for the life he was building. While she, carrying his child of which he knew nothing, faced judicial notifications that took her breath away and medical consultations paid from her own pocket. The world knew nothing. The world saw Robert Cavendish as the fiancé, the future father, the successful businessman, and applauded. The second notification arrived 5 days later. This time it was not from the Braga and Partners firm. It came from the administration of the condominium of the apartment where she lived, the apartment that was in his name where she had lived for 4 years and from which she had left the week after the party, taking only what fit in 3 suitcases. The notification said that the parking space that had been granted to her unofficially for her vehicle still registered in his name had to be vacated within 10 days. The condominium had received an official request from the owner. Objectively, it was only a parking space, but Rachel looked at that paper for a long time because she understood what it meant. Robert was cleaning systematically, methodically, without haste and without pity. He was erasing every trace of her existence in the perimeter of the life he had built. Company, medical insurance, apartment, parking space one after another with documents, deadlines, bureaucratic apparatus of someone who has well-paid lawyers and plenty of time. She was alone, pregnant, with 4 months of savings and an open judicial case. She called Dr. Frederick. "I need you to keep this notification together with the previous one and with everything else," said the lawyer after listening. "We are building a pattern of behavior, and a pattern has weight." "How much weight?" Rachel asked. And in her voice there was a roughness she did not try to hide. Dr. Frederick kept silence for a second. "I understand the pressure," he said. "And I need you to understand that what he is doing now will cost him dearly later. But before that, there is something I think you need to know." Rachel read the message 3 times. Robert had arrived before her to Marcus. He had called first. He had planted his version before she could present the true one. And Marcus, who was her only witness with direct knowledge and without family ties, was now touched by the opposing side. She left the phone on the table with a calm that cost her more than everything in those weeks. 22 weeks of pregnancy. 4 months of savings. Open judicial case without witness. Ex who had announced engagement and paternity to the whole world at the same time as he surgically erased her existence. And now this. At night, Phoebe appeared without warning, as always, as she did every time her older sister's radar activated without rational explanation. She entered, saw Rachel sitting at the kitchen table with the phone in front of her and the look of someone processing more than the face can hide. For an instant she said nothing, then sat next to her, not across but beside, and stayed like that. Rachel showed her Marcus's message. Phoebe read it and kept silence. "He arrived before you to your only witness." Rachel said, "He is not careless, Phoebe. It is strategy. I know. He is surrounding me." The voice did not tremble. "He is doing it while no one knows that my son is growing here." She put her hand on her belly, a gesture that had become involuntary. "If I speak now with the case open and without a witness, I will arrive weak. If I do not speak, he will continue building his version without any real obstacle." Phoebe looked at the table, but Marcus did not answer my firm, she said slowly. "He warned you." Rachel raised her eyes. "He warned you," Phoebe repeated. "That is not neutrality. It is someone who has not yet chosen a side." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was not the silence of someone with no way out. It was the silence of someone who has just seen a crack of light in the wall that seemed solid. Small, narrow but existing. Rachel took the phone and wrote to Marcus. "Thanks for the warning. Can I call you tomorrow?" The answer arrived 3 minutes later. "You can." She left the phone on the table and looked at it for an instant. The ground was still without firm soil, the savings continued to decrease, the case remained open, the belly continued to grow in silence, but there was a crack. And Rachel Bennett had learned long ago that a crack is all a prepared person needs. Marcus Anderson answered on the first ring. He was 48 years old, had a deep voice and the direct manner of someone who has spent his whole life in meetings where every word has weight. Rachel had worked by his side for 2 years at Cavendish Logistics. 2 years in which they had disagreed several times, coincided many more, and built that kind of professional respect that does not need friendship to be real. "I knew you would call," he said before she opened her mouth. "Did you know why?" "Because when the Braga and Partners firm called me trying to build this, I knew it was not only defense. It was a counterattack." He told her that there were emails in which Robert personally approved every financial decision of that period with date, electronic signature. with his own text authorizing the transfers that he now called irregularities. Rachel knew those emails. She had participated in every exchange but had forgotten or perhaps preferred not to remember that Marcus was copied on most of them. "I signed all of them," he said simply. "Otherwise it could not be." That was the protocol of the time. Dr. Frederick turned 2 pages and said, "And there is more. Here is a report from September 2019 in which Robert officially congratulates the administrative department with Rachel's name mentioned explicitly for the recovery of the cash. Internal document dated signed with company letterhead." He made a pause. If he presents any official claim using the version he is trying to build, this document will appear at the first hearing and the case will collapse under its own weight. The silence in the room had another texture than the previous weeks. It was not silence of impotence. It was the silence of someone who has just seen how the board turns. Rachel left the office that day with certified copies of everything, with a strategy defined by Dr. Frederick in 3 stages, and with something she had not felt in pure state since the night of the party. Control. Not euphoria. Not revenge. Control. That special sensation of someone who has been cornered for weeks and has just recovered firm ground under her feet. On the way home without planning it, she passed in front of the Central Medical Center. Dr. Caroline had written to her 2 days earlier confirming the scheduled review for the following week. 24 weeks. Everything within normal. Rachel replied confirming. She stopped on the sidewalk for an instant looking at the facade of the building. 24 weeks. 6 months. A belly that no longer fit in silence. It was already visible. It was already real. It was already presence that the world was beginning to notice even when she said nothing. Time worked, and for the first time in several weeks it worked in her favor. It was Samuel who accelerated what happened next. He called on a Saturday morning, which was already unusual because Samuel Cavendish did not call on weekends without reason. His voice had that special quality of someone who has made a difficult decision and has already passed the stage of doubts. "Robert has called a business dinner for next Wednesday," he said, slowly choosing every word. "It will be in the new company council, 2 external investors, and the accountant he hired to review the 2019 contracts. It is a dinner to align positions. He is going to present his version before any official notification arrives." Rachel kept silence. "Why are you telling me this?" A long pause of those that occur when someone chooses between the easy and the correct. "Because I will be at that dinner," said Samuel. "Robert invited me as founder. He wants my presence as a symbol of continuity." Another pause. "And why do I have documents? He does not know about documents from the 2019 period that I kept because I always had the habit of keeping everything and that show exactly what you did for that company." Rachel closed her eyes for a second. "Mr. Samuel," she said in a low voice, "do you understand what you are doing?" "I understand that I am going against my own son." The voice did not tremble. "I understand that this is going to cost dearly. But I have built my whole life with honesty. I am not going to sit and watch as someone uses my name as decoration to destroy a person who does not deserve to be destroyed." The silence that followed did not need an answer, but Rachel gave it to herself. "I need you to speak with my lawyer before doing anything." It was what he expected. "Send me the contact." Dr. Frederick Lewis spoke with Samuel Cavendish for 40 minutes that same day. Rachel was at the other end of the city in the apartment, unable to do anything productive. She only waited with the phone on the table and her hand on her belly, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. When the lawyer returned the call, there was something different in his voice. Beyond professional restraint, something closer to satisfaction. Of those that very disciplined people only allow themselves when they really cannot contain it. "He has 3 documents we did not have," he said. An internal note from 2018 in which Robert specifically entrusts you with carrying out the transfers he now calls irregularities. The minutes of a council meeting in which he personally approves the financial strategy you executed, and an email of his to the council in which he expressly attributes to you the merit of the company's recovery. Pause. With these 3 documents plus what Marcus brought, there is no claim, no investigation, no version. And the dinner on Wednesday. Wednesday, Rachel repeated. It is the place where he plans to consolidate his version before acting. If Samuel is at that table with these documents, the version will not be consolidated. Dr. Frederick kept silence. But Rachel, this has to be done with precision without emotional confrontation. Presentation of facts at a business table. Samuel has to be prepared for what Robert will do when he understands what is happening. He is prepared, said Rachel. And in that phrase there was a certainty born of 8 years of knowing that man. On Tuesday, the eve of the dinner, Rachel went to the scheduled review with Dr. Caroline. 24 weeks. Everything within normal. The report said it in medical language, but in Rachel's memory something else remained. Dr. Caroline looking at the ultrasound screen and saying almost to herself, "This baby is calm." At first he gave some scares, but now he is calmer. Rachel did not answer immediately. She looked at the image on the screen for an instant. "How did you know that at first he gave scares?" she asked. "By the position." The doctor pointed with professional delicacy something on the screen, but it resolved itself. "Sometimes they do. They find their way by themselves." Rachel looked at that image for a few seconds more. They find their way by themselves. She left the consultation with the ultrasound envelope under her arm and the phrase resonating in some place that was not exactly her head. The dinner took place on Wednesday night in a private restaurant called Wine Space in the center of the city. Rachel was not there. It was not her place at that moment, and she knew it with the precision of someone who for years had managed situations that required presence at the right moment and absence at the inappropriate one. That night belonged to Samuel. She stayed in the apartment with Phoebe, who appeared without warning as always with food and the silent capacity to occupy a space without filling the air with unnecessary words. At 10:14 the phone vibrated. Message from Samuel. 3 words. Done. I will call you tomorrow. Phoebe read over her shoulder and kept silence for an instant. What do you think happened? Rachel asked, looking at the 3 words on the screen. I think he presented the documents in front of the council, the investors, and the accountant Robert had hired to build the version against me. And I think Robert for the first time in a long time was left without an answer in a room full of people important to him. Phoebe said nothing. He will react, Rachel continued. When a man like Robert loses control of the version of the facts, he does not accept it in silence. He will react. She left the phone on the table. And now it will be a reaction without support. And I do not know what part is more important that is yet to come. The pregnancy, Phoebe said in a low voice. The pregnancy, Rachel confirmed. The moment arrived. Not because the deadline had run out, though it was running out. Not because someone forced her, but because the ground was firm, the documents were protected, the witness was on the right side, and the man who had tried to systematically erase her existence had just discovered that erasing a person who had built everything with her own hands was not as simple as signing a notification. She knew what would come next, and for the first time since the night of the party she was not afraid of what would come. She was prepared. The call arrived 2 days after the dinner. Rachel was in the kitchen when his name appeared on the screen. She counted 3 rings. She answered on the 4th. Rachel. The voice had a crack in the middle that he could not hide. The man who directed meetings like surgical operations, who entered negotiations knowing the result before sitting down, who had chosen every word at that party with the precision of someone rehearsing. That man was on the other end of the line without being able to control his own tone. We need to talk. I know you knew about the dinner. I knew about the dinner. An inspiration on the other side, heavy of those the body makes when it processes more than the head can order. The documents my father presented all are authentic. You know they are authentic. I need to see you. Then come. But first I need to tell you something by phone before you hear it from someone else. She put her hand on her belly. I am pregnant. 25 weeks. What was heard on the other side was not a word. It was the sound of a man who has just received something the body registers before reason. A kind of physical blow that crosses the telephone line and arrives as pressure in the air. 25, he repeated in a low voice almost to himself. Yes. Then when we were still she hung up. Robert appeared at the apartment that same day. He entered, saw the belly and stopped in the middle of the room as if the floor had changed density under his feet. He remained looking with his hands open along his body, without a glass, without a phone, without any of the accessories that usually occupied those restless hands. Only him frozen, looking at the physical proof of everything he had done while believing he controlled everything. When he spoke, only 2 words came out. I already know. From a man who had chosen 200 words in public to humiliate her at a party. 2 words. After that he spoke for a long time, standing with his hands that closed and opened. The voice carried the weight of someone destroying aloud a construction to which he had dedicated months. He said the judicial claim had been dictated by pride. He said that from the beginning he had known that the documents confirmed nothing. He said that the dinner had been the moment he understood that the version he had built did not support the simple weight of truth. He said he was sorry. Rachel listened to everything. When he finished, she looked at him. "I think you are sorry. But being sorry is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as changing. Direct without trembling. You will recognize this child. You will assume all the responsibility. That is not up for discussion. The rest in what kind of man you decide to become is no longer my business." He remained looking with a question on his face that he could not formulate. He left without an answer. The answer did not exist. In the following days, Robert Cavendish's world began to come apart at the seams. Sophia found out about Rachel's pregnancy the same day he returned from her apartment. Not because he had any intention of telling her, but because he returned different, and Sophia was intelligent enough to read a man who came back from a conversation that had changed him. She asked directly. He answered with the truth. Perhaps for the first time in a long time. Sophia left that same night without hallway crying scenes with suitcases and the cold clarity of a woman who had bet on a man and discovered that on the table where he played there were cards she had never seen. Her pregnancy, announced to the world as the greatest joy of my life in the following week, faced those silent complications that life imposes without asking permission and without public statements. The announcement simply disappeared from Robert's social networks like the engagement, as if it had never existed. Robert Cavendish was left alone in the big apartment with a cancelled process without result and 2 children who would arrive by paths he had not planned. 3 weeks later, Cavendish Logistics celebrated the Cavendish Forum, the semi-annual event to maintain relations with clients. Hall of the Meridiano Hotel. 150 people. Board of directors, investors, strategic clients, sector press. That kind of night Robert had built for years as a showcase of the company and his own image. Rachel had not been invited by Cavendish. Nova Distributors had invited her. The grey-haired director whom Samuel had called a call the old man defined as closing an old debt had confirmed her appointment as financial director and included her name on the list of Nova representatives for the event with the naturalness of someone who does not imagine the weight of that gesture. She entered the Meridiano Hall in the 27th week of pregnancy with the Nova Distributors identification on her lapel. The hall was in full swing at the peak temperature of such an event. Laughter, conversations, clinking of glasses, continuous movement of people circulating between tables with the measured courtesy of the corporate world. Rachel greeted the Nova representatives, exchanged cards, spoke with 2 clients from the sector with the naturalness of someone who had never had to pretend she belonged somewhere. Between one conversation and another she felt the gaze. She did not have to search. The hall was exactly the size in which 2 people who know each other well feel the presence of the other before seeing it. Robert was at the other end of the hall in a dark suit with an assistant at his side in the place Sophia would have occupied, smiling with the visible effort of someone who charges for it. Robert had not yet seen her. He was talking with 2 members of the board of directors with his back to the entrance through which she had entered. Rachel approached the Nova table, sat down, asked for water and waited. Time passed. The presenter announced the opening speech exactly at 8 at night. Robert went up to the podium with his usual naturalness, microphone in hand, open posture, smile polished over years in events exactly like this. The whole hall turned its attention to him. 150 people. Glasses left on tables. Conversations cut in mid-sentence. He began to speak. Semester of growth, new contracts, solidity of the company built on values that resist the passage of time. The words came out clean in the rhythm of someone who knows the speech by heart, cadence of an experienced presenter who knows exactly how much time to dedicate to each pause, to each figure, to each moment of emphasis. Then he opened his arms, encompassing the hall in a gesture of union with the audience, a gesture he had made hundreds of times. His eyes scanned the tables from right to left and stopped. Nova Distributors table, 2nd row. Rachel Bennett. Plaque on the lapel. 27 weeks pregnant. She looked at him with the same calm she had maintained in the center of that other hall months earlier when he had chosen 200 people as spectators of her humiliation. The phrase cut in the middle. It was not a hesitation. It was a dry cut. Of those that occur when the brain receives information the body has not yet processed and both stop. Half a second. A full second. The assistant next to the podium raised his eyes from the phone. A journalist in the 3rd row tilted her head 3 centimeters to the right. An unconscious gesture of someone who notices that something has changed before understanding what. 2 board members exchanged a quick glance over the glasses. Robert recovered. He returned to the phrase. The next one came out a tone lower with a slightly different speed from those any person who knew him well would have recognized as a sign of a man speaking with only half his head while the other is somewhere else. He could not avoid looking again, and when he looked she was still there motionless with the plaque of a foreign company on her lapel with his child in her belly, and with 8 years of history he had thrown in the trash in a single night at a party, as if one could cancel what a person builds with her own hands. The hand holding the microphone tightened with more force. The vein on the side of his neck marked for 2 seconds. A journalist from a second table on the left, one of those who spend their lives learning to read what happens under what is said, slowly lowered his glass and remained completely motionless like an animal that smells something in the air and decides not to move so as not to scare it. Robert finished the speech. The applause sounded polite, correct, the ones given by protocol when a corporate audience fulfills the ritual regardless of what it has just witnessed. The hall had not seen the whole story, nor the documents, nor the 14 months, nor the cancelled process without result, but it had seen a man who had lost the thread of his own speech in front of a pregnant woman sitting at the table of a competitor company. In that environment where reputation is built over years and collapses in seconds, that was enough for the questions to begin even before the night ended. He came down from the podium and crossed the hall directly toward her. In that movement there was no calculation. There was impulse from a man who had just been exposed in a place where public exposure has consequences. He had not yet assimilated that some movements make what is already bad worse. He approached the Nova table. The rest of the representatives perceived the attention before understanding its cause and by collective instinct created a delicate space around the two. "Rachel," he said. The voice was low, but it was impossible to hide what was underneath. It was the voice of a man trying to maintain composure in a place where composure had already escaped him. "I did not know you would be here." She raised her eyes slowly. "I know," she said. 3 seconds. He remained motionless, looking at her, looking at the plaque, looking at that whole woman he had tried to reduce, and who was sitting in a chair at a corporate event with more presence than he himself had managed to maintain on the podium 5 minutes earlier. "I did not imagine," he said, even lower, "what I had and what I gave up." Her eyes moistened exactly 2 seconds. Not from pain, from something deeper and older. The real weight of 8 years, of the child growing inside her, of everything it had cost to be sitting in that chair with the name of a foreign company on the lapel and the back still straight. 2 seconds. Then she blinked, breathed. When she opened her eyes again, they were the same as always, clear, direct, without trembling. "I know you did not imagine it," she said. That was always the problem. She took her bag, said goodbye to the Nova director with a short word, and left the hotel hall with the same step with which she had left the party at Samuel's months earlier, without haste, without looking back, with a back that had not bent in a single one of the moments when the world had tried to bend it. The journalist from the second table observed how she left. Then he looked at Robert, who had remained motionless in the middle of the hall, surrounded by 150 people, with the expression of someone who has just understood in a room full of important people that he had lost something no money could return. Then the journalist opened his blog and began to write. Samuel Cavendish appeared at the apartment one Saturday afternoon 2 weeks before the scheduled birth date. Mrs. Claire arrived with him. In her eyes she carried everything she had not managed to express with words since the night of the party, since the kitchen of her own house, since every moment she had known and had kept silent more than she should. Rachel approached her and hugged her. Mrs. Claire took her by the shoulders with both hands, and this time she did not hold back. She cried in silence, contained with the cry of a mother who has seen her son make a mistake without being able to correct it, and who carries the weight of that in a way that has no name. "You deserved more," she said with a broken voice. Rachel did not answer. She only held her for a while, because in that woman there was something authentic in the one who had closed her eyes when her son spoke and carried a guilt that was not entirely hers and did not know what to do with it. Samuel remained on the other side of the table observing. When Rachel moved away, the old man looked at her with his usual frankness, with the clarity of someone who has reached the end of a long calculation and accepts the result. "You have built everything from zero twice," he said. "The company. And now this." He gestured toward the belly. "I do not know many people capable of that." "I was helped," she said. "I corrected a mistake," he answered. "They are different things." The child was born at dawn on a Thursday in the Nova Hospital. Phoebe was outside. Dr. Caroline Hayes was inside with sure hands and a voice that did not need volume to transmit that everything was all right, that everything was going as it should, that that moment belonged to her. Robert was notified by message. He appeared an hour later in the hallway. He stayed outside with the expression of someone in that minute taking exact consciousness of the size of what he had decided to renounce. Phoebe entered first. She stopped for a second at the door with her eyes already full and then crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed without saying anything. Exactly what Rachel needed. That night when the room sank into silence, Phoebe went to rest and the nurse made the last round. Rachel remained alone. The child slept in the crib next to her small calm with the uniform breathing of someone who still does not know the size of the world he has to cross. She got up slowly, took him with both hands, returned to the bed. The window of the room was ajar. The city outside emitted its constant murmur indifferent to live real. She looked for a long time at her son's face. Somewhere in that city was the man who had gone up to a podium with the world in the palm of his hand and had lost the thread of his own speech because she was sitting in a chair he had tried to erase with documents, lawyers, and cold bureaucracy. The man who confused power with reason and who had remained motionless in the middle of a hall full of important people with the expression of someone who finally too late had understood the magnitude of what he had destroyed. Rachel rested her cheek against her son's cheek. He left me because he decided I was replaceable. What he did not know is that the women who build with their own hands do not disappear. They go through everything and come out the other side whole with a child in their arms, with a man without stain, and with the certainty that they never needed his approval to know what they are worth. The city